Well, thank you. It's tremendously exciting for me to be here. I think ending the drug war is one of the most important things that can be done, and the work that you're trying to do as students to help that process go forward is really crucial. And so I'm going to explain a little bit why I think the drug war needs to end for all sorts of obvious reasons that we know, but also for consciousness change in the world that we so desperately need at a time of more increasing authoritarianism, fundamentalism, tribalism, nationalism. I think psychedelics can play a crucial role in helping change that. And so just to give you a sense of the landscape. So I started MAPS in 1986 as a nonprofit pharmaceutical company. In 1992, there was a meeting at FDA. Oh, before I go further, let me just say that when people have questions, you don't have to wait till the end. So just raise your hand, write it down on your card, and we'll pick up your questions. And so I think it's better if you want to ask questions while we're going. We will have some time afterwards if we're not kicked out of the room. But please feel free to ask questions while you're going on. So in 1992, there was a meeting at the FDA, and they decided to put science before politics and open the door to psychedelic research. And so Hefter was started in 1993. So that's there. And then Beckley, which was started by Amanda Fielding in England in 97, and then the latest nonprofit is USONA from Madison, Wisconsin in 2014. Now, there's also two for-profit companies. One is Compass Pathways, founded in 2016. So they're the for-profit group trying to develop psilocybin into a medicine. And then founded in 1886, one of the old line companies, Johnson & Johnson, which purchased Janssen, has just got approval a few weeks ago for ketamine, for S-ketamine, one of the isomers of ketamine, to make it into a medicine for depression. And then there's another company I didn't mention that was called Elucis Benefit Corp. It started out trying to do LSD microdosing research for creativity. Their first study for that did not work. And now they're looking at, they felt that everybody that enrolled in their study was kind of creative, and so they didn't find a difference between the two groups. And now they're focusing on psychedelics, but for physical illnesses, not for psychotherapy. So that's the lay of the land right now. And I do think it's important that we recognize that it's because of the success of what we've done over these years, the nonprofits, that we've created these opportunities for for-profits and to come in. And so while for-profits do have a lot of bad incentives, I think that you talk about nonprofits for innovation and for-profits for scaling. And so we need the nonprofits to keep the for-profits in check, but we need the for-profits as well. And so MAPS has a modified version. So what I've realized a few years ago is that once we make MDMA into a medicine, we do have an opportunity to sell it as a medicine. And if we can make some money at that, we can use that money for more research instead of constantly asking for donors for more money. So in the history of MAPS, we've raised over $70 million in donations, which is absolutely astonishing once we added it up. But if we want to globalize MDMA for PTSD, if we want to look at all sorts of other indications for MDMA, if we want to move into other drugs, there's going to be a lot of other research that we need to do. And so I felt like if we can find a way to market MDMA and use that to generate resources for further research, we should do that. But I think the for-profit model, particularly when it comes to healthcare, has a lot of perverse incentives, and it's not really a good way to do it. So what we've started is the MAPS Public Benefit Corp, which is a modification of capitalism, where what you can do is you can maximize public benefit, not profit. In a normal corporation, the minority shareholders can sue the company if they don't think they're maximizing profits. And if they make the case, they can throw out the management, and then they can get back to their core business of maximizing profits. And so that's, I think, one of the perverse incentives that has caused a lot of the problems that we have for profit maximization over everything else. But in a benefit corp, and there's several thousand of these benefit corps now, you can maximize public benefit over profit. And so we've created the public benefit corp. So people make donations to MAPS, they get tax deductions, MAPS invests in the benefit corp, And MAPS is the only investor in the Benefit Corp. So it's 100% owned by the nonprofit. The Benefit Corp does the research and will eventually sell MDMA by prescription. So that's our corporate structure. I don't think we're going to do this kind of stuff, direct ads to patients. Ask your doctor if MDMA therapy is right for you. Actually, it turns out that America and New Zealand are the only countries in the world that permit pharmaceutical companies to market directly to patients. So again, when you have the profit incentive, then you get all this kind of marketing. But we are making MDMA into a medicine, and who's we? We is changing a lot. This is the MAPS team. Zendo project, which I'll talk more about, our advocacy, which Izzy has been the, Natalie, yay Izzy. And then our operations, our media, our communications, fundraising, executive team. And then we have, this is our Benefit Corp team. And so now we actually have 55 people full-time, all funded by donations. So it's pretty shocking. These are the principal investigators for our different studies. Chris is here, Chris Nichols from the Madison site. And we've trained hundreds of therapists already. So we've had training programs over the last 4 years. This was the most recent one in Europe. We just had a training program in Nashville that was one of the things that was so exciting. First off, it's the first training program where we're training people for expanded access and they're actually paying for the training. But we also had people from 3 different institutions that we paid for them to be there, but they all had permission of their bosses. And 3 of them were from the Bronx Veterans Administration, 3 psychologists. One was a psychiatrist from the Army who had the permission from his commanding officer. And we also had a psychotherapist from the police, from the outside of Boston, a small town, Everett, outside of Boston. So we have actually now a police psychotherapist, a military psychiatrist, and psychotherapists from the VA getting educated. So this is a picture of me when I was 18 years old. And dreaming of, this is when I decided to become a psychedelic therapist and devote myself to my own therapy and to trying to bring back psychedelic research. So I'll just very briefly say why I came to this idea when I was 18. So I do, we've had discussions earlier today. So I come from a family of privilege. I realized I had probably every possible privilege you could get in America. I was the firstborn male child of my parents. I was the chosen people from being Jewish, American exceptionalism I bought into, white, male, and I had resources from my family that I could become a Vietnam War draft resistor and plan to go to jail. And my parents said that if that happens, I'd never be able to be a professional, but they would make sure I wouldn't starve. So I had all of these advantages of privilege, and yet I was also educated a whole lot about the Holocaust, about nuclear warfare. I was, Cuban Missile Crisis. I was a little kid. Then I was last years of the lottery for Vietnam. So I was able, from that position of privilege, to have a sense of security to look at deeper threats than just food and shelter. And so I had a very difficult time. This is Stan Grof and Brigitte, his wife now. I had a very difficult time with my LSD trips when I was 17 and 18. And so I went to the guidance counselor at my college. And so unlike probably a lot of your experiences today, in 1972, I said, I'm having trouble with my tripping, and I need some help. And the guidance counselor was, oh, okay, that's legitimate, So they helped me, and they gave me a copy of a copy of Realms of the Human Unconscious by Stan Grof. So reading that book put it all in context for me. This was about science, looking at spirituality, looking at different states of consciousness, but it was fundamentally about therapy. It had the reality check of trying to help patients, and it was suppressed. And when I learned about it, and this was shortly after Nixon declared Timothy Leary the most dangerous man in America. And so I was like, what is Leary doing right? That he's pissed off Nixon. And so I felt that what he was doing right was really talking about thinking for yourself, about not bowing down to authority figures, And there's another aspect of it which really came to me when my 21st birthday. So on my 21st birthday, my girlfriend at the time was away in London, and I was in Sarasota, Florida, and so I said, perfect time to take LSD. So I decided to do LSD by myself, not always the smartest thing. So I did LSD by myself on my 21st birthday. Let's see, I missed the picture. But so on my 21st birthday, what I did was I spent the day by myself, and I had a bunch of, this is in the old days where you have records on a stack. And so there was a bunch of music playing, and time is different when you're under the influence of LSD. So after one record ended and it was quiet, I was like, oh, it was totally quiet. It seemed like an eternity. And then I started hearing this sound that seemed like it was somehow or other a air raid siren. And I thought, what a bummer. Now I just turned 21, and this is the Russians coming to bomb Tampa. Because Tampa is the headquarters of the U.S. military, and that's where we've got loads of underground planes with nuclear weapons and stuff. And so in my mind, I was like, God, my whole life is in front of me, but now it's over. This air raid siren is going to come on, and it's going to bomb Tampa. And in a brief period of time, I was like, well, if I've only got a few seconds or minutes to live, I might as well live it up as much as I could. So I'm going to go out and walk to the bomb. I'm going to go walk towards where the bomb is, and I'm going to take everything in. And as soon as luckily I was at the end of a dead-end street. And so I walked out the door, and I'm walking down the street, and it was incredible. The different colors of all of the vegetation and the subtle shades of all the greens and the flowers, and then all of a sudden, the blue of the sky and the different colors of the clouds and the sounds of the birds. It was just this magnificent perspective on the variability of life. And I just felt like, God, it's so exciting. And then I remembered a Grateful Dead lyric, which was, I don't know, but I've been told in the heat of the sun, a man died of cold. So some of you may know that. But it's about your mind. And I thought maybe, I'll think fine and I'll survive this thing. And I'm sort of walking down the road, walking towards this bomb, feeling more alive than I've ever felt before. And then all of a sudden this air raid siren stopped, and then the drums started and the guitar started. And I was like, oh my God, am I dumb? It was the other album that I'd put on. And I had completely forgot that the sound started like an air raid siren. And so then I felt like, wow, my life is back. I have a whole life. But I wasn't as, somehow that hyper-awareness of being in the presence of death and trying to live every moment while you're also on LSD, it felt like I couldn't sustain that degree of awareness or attention once that fear of dying diminished. But it made me realize that LSD could really help to have these profound experiences that had a kind of a spiritual tone to it for me. That was the most spiritual experience I'd ever had. I had been disappointed that my bar mitzvah had not turned me into a man. But I was glad that LSD was finally helping out. So, Einstein has said it has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. And so what that means to me is that we need to develop our humanity, and that I needed to start focusing inward. Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. So again, this idea that we have to look internally for psychological factors. There are wars of resources, wars of territorial conquering, but a lot of it is the mental kind of processes that would permit us to do that kind of stuff. And then this was also going on as I was growing up, the people going to the moon. And Edgar Mitchell said, when we see our fundamental unity with the processes of nature and the functioning of the universe, as I so vividly saw it from the Apollo spacecraft, the old ways of thinking and behaving will disappear. So again, this is about the political implications of the mystical experience, the sense of unity that psychedelics really can contribute and have been used for thousands of years. So that became, so this was turning 21 on LSD on a beautiful day, turned ominous. But luckily, I survived. And so all of this really was confirmed for me in 1983 when I read this book. This was by the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, Robert Mueller, the mystic of the UN. He ended up being at the UN for 40 years. He was a Dutch resistance fighter. And then what he wrote this book about was that this UN is for mediating conflicts between countries, but a lot of these conflicts are religious-based. And we see a lot of religious fundamentalism. And what he was basically saying is that the mystical experience of unity makes it so that you don't need to hold on so tight to the literal aspects of your religion or the miracle stories, that you can think of religion as like languages. We don't say English is better than French and French is better than German. They're all different ways based on the culture that we grew up in that we use to essentially do the same thing, to talk to each other. And if you see religion like that, and you don't need to say this is the one right religion and everyone else is wrong and I'm the only one going to heaven, and so that was his theory, is that we need this global spirituality. And not unexpectedly, he put the picture of the Earth from the moon on the cover. But he didn't say a word about psychedelics. So I wrote him a letter as a college undergraduate, and to my utter shock, he replied to me. So one message that I'd really like to leave with you today is that you can reach out to people, and a lot of times they may actually reply. I wrote a letter to Stan Grof in 1972, and he replied, and I took a workshop with him in the summer of '72. So my whole life has been on, I feel like in a way, on a, shipwrecked on a deserted island, and you put a little note in a bottle and you throw it off into the ocean. You hope somebody will get it. And a lot of times it actually works. So really don't hold yourself back to say, oh, I'm just, a student and nobody's going to pay attention to me. So I wrote and I said to him, you say exactly what I believe, but you don't say anything about psychedelics. I think psychedelics should be studied. Would you help us bring back psychedelic research? And he wrote me back saying, yes, he would. And then eventually he did. So this was sort of the theory of change about why psychedelics. And then the other part was at college, I did the Good Friday experiment follow-up for my college undergraduate thesis at New College. This was New College. It was the best thing Timothy Leary ever did. It was using psychedelics on a Good Friday in a service. Half the people got psilocybin, half got placebo. They were all divinity students. The minister was Martin Luther King's mentor, Reverend Howard Thurman, who was an incredible speaker, an orator. And so these 20 people were into this Good Friday service, and then it turned out 9 out of the 20 had mystical experiences, 8 out of those 9 had psilocybin. And so 25 years later, I tracked them all down. I found 19 out of the 20. It took me multiple years. But what I found is that they reported not only did they consider their mystical experience to have been genuine and had others without drugs since then, but they said it increased their acceptance of other religions and beliefs. It made them more tolerant. It made them deepen their equanimity in the face of life crises. It reduced their fear of dying, and it promoted solidarity and identification with other people of all different kinds. So again, this was for me the confirmation of the theory of change, that psychedelics integrated into society with potentially millions of people having access to them can really change consciousness, and that's what we need as the core problem that we have from tribalism, fundamentalism, et cetera. So, and this was recently sort of verified by Robin Card Harris and his team at Imperial College, where they've done psilocybin research, and they looked at whether the mystical experience was correlated with increased nature relatedness and decreased authoritarian political views, which they found that it was. So again, this is sort of more modern. Several psilocybin researchers have said, don't publish this, because once people who are authoritarians hear that psychedelics are useful for that, they'll maybe stop the research. But I don't think that's the case. And I do think that we have to report science as we find it. So anyway, this is another confirmation. And then the other aspect of it, this is Richard Rockefeller, who was chairman of the board of advisors of Doctors Without Borders. He was involved in Kosovo and Serbia. And so many people there are traumatized, and not enough therapists and not enough psychiatrists. And so he started taking interest in MDMA. And so in addition to this spiritual experience that people can have, we also are programmed by our past traumas, and not just our traumas, but multi-generational traumas. And that's how you see problems and conflicts going from generation to generation. And so MDMA can be very helpful about healing PTSD and also healing multi-generational trauma through epigenetic phenomena that we now understand actually can transmit certain sort of set points for anxiety and fears down the generations. And just to say this, we have a project in Israel that's Israelis and Palestinians are doing ayahuasca together and also doing MDMA together. Now, these are not the true haters on both sides. These are more of the open-minded on either side. It's all illegal right now in Israel. And so what we wanted to do is study how MDMA can be helpful for conflict resolution. And so it's a 3-year project. The first year is interviews with all these people. And then we just got funding, $130,000 a year for 2 years. We just got a donation for years 2 and 3 to do a planned experiment, to bring a bunch of Israelis and Palestinians away from the area of conflict, probably to Portugal or to Spain, where we can do a planned experiment with psychedelics. So again, it's more like, it's more like training the trainers. I mean, it's not going to start with the people on the extremes at this point, but it starts with the people more open, and then they'll branch out to their friends and others that are more resistant. And then the other sort of operating philosophy, theory of change, is that legalization follows medicalization. And so this is a chart of Americans' attitudes for legalizing marijuana from around 1968 to around 2016, 17. And so you can see that it rises. This was the period of time in the 70s, right after the period where, massive explosion of use. And everybody started thinking here, including me, oh yeah, marijuana, it should be legal in a few years. It's so obviously a good idea. And there was a lot of delusion here about how quickly society would change. And then we get the backlash right around here, 78. Carter is elected on a principle of decriminalizing marijuana. And then we have the parents groups coming and forming, and the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and all of that. And so we basically see then the backlash, Nancy Reagan just say no. And there's around 20 years here of no progress. But starting here in 1996, things start moving up. And what that is 1996 was California and Arizona passing medical marijuana. So when you have a culture that's traumatized and fearful and has been trained to think all the negatives and that there's no benefits, medicalization is the way that you can start educating them. Because we can never afford the billions of dollars that Partnership for a Drug-Free America or the Drug Czar has to educate, but the media reports on science. So you do science, and then you get millions and millions of dollars of free ads, in a sense, you could say. But it's better than ads because it's in the news and people believe it more than the ads. So medicalization really follows legalization, but we need legalization because the sort of mass cultural change that I'm talking about doesn't come from just treating patients with a diagnosis. It comes from all of us overcoming our different kind of prejudices. So that's why I think trying to work through the FDA is a viable strategy. So briefly, for those of you who are not aware of the history of MDMA, it was invented in 1912 by Merck. They were just trying to get around a competitor's patent to get to a different drug. They didn't know what they had. They never really tested it for 15 years, and then they tested it in animals, and the animals didn't say, oh, I love my fellow mice. They just looked uninteresting and they abandoned it. The next time we see it, it's the U.S. Army military mind control people are looking for mind control drugs and drugs for what they call non-lethal incapacitants. And so they tested 8 drugs in animals on a continuum chemically from mescaline on one side, from peyote, and methamphetamine on the other. And so MDMA is more or less in the middle. And so a good way to think about MDMA is that it's similar to mescaline and methamphetamine. It has the energizing properties of meth without the jitteriness, so that you can stand still, you can meditate, you can be peaceful, but you take it and you'll stay up all night. And it has the psychedelic properties of mescaline, but without the ego-dissolving properties, so that it's more grounded and centered. So but then they again abandoned it since then, and then Merck, for whatever reason, in 1959 looked at it again, found nothing, and abandoned it once more. And then in the middle 70s, Sasha Shulgin rediscovered MDMA. There was a drug called MDA that was very popular during the 60s. It was criminalized in 1970 by the Controlled Substances Act. So MDA is methylene dioxyamphetamine. MDMA is methylene dioxymethamphetamine. The MDA is more like an LSD MDMA combination, kind of. But people started looking for, now that MDA is illegal, what can we discover that's a new molecule that's legal? And so Sasha came up with MDMA, thought it was great, gave it to Leo Zeff, we heard about earlier about the secret chief, and around 500,000 doses were distributed in therapeutic settings, private homes, personal growth from the middle 70s to the early 80s. But then it leaked out of that and became ecstasy, in particular here at the Stark Club in Dallas, where George Bush Jr. went there, all sorts of people went there. And it was the use in public settings. You could have an 800 number, you could buy it at bars, they would sell it behind the counter. This is what attracted the attention of the police. So in '84, the police tried to criminalize the DEA. This is me right there, spying on the DEA. This is the headquarters of the DEA. We knew that the crackdown was going to come. It was obvious because, again, MDMA, under the code name Adam, was the therapy drug, but because it was being used as ecstasy, in a time of renewed crackdown on the drug war, it was going to become illegal. And so we prepared. And so once the DEA moved to criminalize MDMA, there was 30 days to file a hearing. So I went and filed for a hearing to discuss how the therapeutic use should stay legal. And while we were having the hearing, we were winning in the court of opinion. We were winning in the courts. We had one rabbi compare MDMA to the Sabbath in the Washington Post. It was great. A Roman Catholic monk said that in Newsweek, he said that MDMA promotes the awakened awareness that monks spend their whole lifetime trying to get. And so it was breaking the stereotype of, party drug. And so the DEA freaked out, and they emergency scheduled MDMA in '85. The ultimate irony here was that that was a crime. It was illegal. The DEA did not have the authority to do that. The Attorney General had the authority from Congress to schedule drugs, but the Attorney General had never subdelegated the power down to the DEA. So a bunch of people that got busted in this period of time all got free because the DEA exceeded their authority. But in any case...
that wasn't the Attorney General. That was Gene Hayslip.
Well, that was Gene Hayslip, yeah, but he emergency scheduled it, and he did not have the power to do it. So then the judge said, the administrative law judge said, yes, go ahead. MDMA should stay legal as a therapy drug, but be illegal for recreational purposes. And the DEA rejected the recommendation, criminalized it, and so it felt to me the only way through now was going to be through the FDA. So in '86, I started MAPS. This is Debbie Harlow. She's the woman that first turned me on to MDMA in 1982. And so what I did not know at the time, and I'm glad I didn't know it, is that no drug had ever been made into a medicine by a nonprofit at that point. It wasn't until 1999, and it was a controversial drug. It was the abortion pill, RU46, and it was funded by Warren Buffett, the Rockefeller family, and the Pritzker family. So again, wealthy liberals supporting a drug that had been abandoned by the pharmaceutical industry. But I started MAPS in '86. So now what I'd like to do is give you, this is going to be a 10-minute video. It's a session, a compilation of one of the veterans.
Are you ready to take your capsule?
Yeah.
Sure.
And he's dealing with rage. And so this is his first session. And a lot of people don't really understand the difference between LSD and MDMA. So in a lot of audiences, I'm sure you guys do, but people are surprised how vocal and rational this patient sounds during the MDMA experience.
I just want to tell you, I had this this really intense feeling come over my body, and my heartbeat started beating real fast, but I didn't get. At first, I started feeling a little afraid, but then once I started breathing, I've never felt that before. I literally felt my heartbeat start to slow down and everything when I started breathing and just relax and the sensation. And it was amazing how, not quickly it went away, but just how in control I felt of making it go away. So usually I've had those feelings. In a way, it kind of felt like when a panic attack kind of comes on, and my heartbeat started, and I felt my whole body flush and get really hot, and then I was just amazed how I was able to not really fight it, but kind of relax.
That's good.
I just thought y'all
Yeah.
might want to know that.
Yeah,
So you
thanks.
may have-
This is 75 milligrams for his first session. And it's a male-female team. They're husband and wife. It's a lot of the teams actually are married, our therapy teams. And around half the 8 hours, people's eyes are closed listening to music, and the other half, they're talking to the therapist in no
really-
particular order.
Amazing. It's hard to put it in words. I feel things that would come up, and then every time they would just blow away like sand, and I even purposely tried to think of things bothersome, like money issues or something, and this voice, this part of me, just like so wise and so intelligent, just like brought this peace over me that just said, you've always been taken care of, you always will be taken care of, there's nothing to worry about, and then it just flows away like sand. And then I tried thinking about that aspect of me that's just really rageful, and also besides that image I told y'all about the fighting with them, I had this image of it like in a jail cell. Yeah, like I have that part of me is locked up in jail, and it's just it's dark, but it's got bright red eyes and just really evil. And I thought of that, and I felt like I felt like I put that person there, and I went to it and just
That's the
opened
blood
door,
pressure machine noise.
hugged that person, and then the eyes just faded away, and it no longer had kind of an evil look to itself, and I visualized both of us just taking apart the jail cell and just really becoming friends. And then I visualized that image I told you about of me, like it coming out of my hips and it stabbing me in the side and everything, and I just had a strong visualization of me like reaching up where the knife was in my side and taking it out, and I took my hands off of its neck and didn't choke it anymore, and just really embraced it, and I don't know, I feel like part of me realizes that I think that I was taking that person and keeping him locked up because I was so afraid of him, and then that by putting him in that cell and keeping him locked up, that I was just making it worse for him. And I was it really more beneficial if we kind of work together, and I'd be I don't know, I just it was really amazing. I never realized how much I thought I was being the peaceful person, but I didn't realize how much I was punishing that aspect of me. I think maybe in Iraq I saw what it was capable of, and I think I was too afraid to, and a part of me just feels like so bad that I did that to him. I mean, I know it's me, but I just describe it wisely.
Part of you.
Yeah.
But I just, that's really amazing, and I don't know, I just got this amazing sense of just guess wisdom. I really don't know.
Sounds a lot like wisdom to me.
It was really amazing. And even when I try and think of that really rageful aspect of me, like I can't even. I know it's there, but it just doesn't. I really feel like so much more at peace with everything.
Great.
Like even if I try and think about Iraq and everything, like I somehow feel like really peaceful about the fact that that's my journey and that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Part of me I know this is part of the part of the drug, but when I try and think, am I going to be able to hold on to this this understanding and this somewhat of wisdom, this knowledge that I have now? Just asking myself that question, I feel like it's so profound that I don't think I could really forget it. I really felt like I met that aspect of me. It's just very, very calming, very sage-like, but just was like very comforting. And like I don't know, it's amazing how I felt like so much lighter. Like I keep thinking of that aspect of me that I kept in a cage, and
Sounds like that part of you needs some lightness.
I know it feels like I don't feel like best friends now. Like you want to chat and get caught up, and
Beautiful.
I really feel like you said, that part of me is a protector, and it's not dangerous. And just thinking about it now, whenever I blow up on people or blow up on my wife and get all angry and yelling at her, I feel like it's because I kept that person locked up, and of course it's going to be hateful and resentful for being locked up, and so when it comes to the surface like that, it's going to be mean and make people cry. I really feel like letting it breathe and letting it be is just going to be so much better for me.
I think so.
And there's this part of me that keeps talking and saying that I should feel bad for keeping that aspect of me, like part of me that's saying like it's all your fault that you created all those feelings, the anger and all that other stuff. But then I don't know what part of me is saying that, because every time it says that, that sage part of me just says it's part of being human. I don't know why I couldn't have come up with this on my own, but I'm glad I found it.
I'm glad too.
Wow. Wow. Now, you can see the kind of self-forgiveness that MDMA promotes, and you can also see that basically people are healing themselves. So the therapists provide this supportive setting for the patient to process at their own rate, in their own sequence, and there are times that you interpret it, but really this is in some ways different than the power dynamics in shamanism, where sometimes shaman is the only one that takes the drug, and then they actively heal the people, and so the power dynamics are there for the healer. And so this is a different approach. It's this idea that we're trying to empower people to heal themselves, and we have a respect for this inner healer, or this sense of the order in which people address things. But this was almost 10 years ago. He's PTSD free now, and at the same time, after this one session, he never had those rage attacks anymore. So for those of you that like data, so in the placebo group, which gets therapy without active MDMA, and these are chronic, treatment-resistant, moderate to severe, but on average severe PTSD patients, 23% of them no longer had PTSD 2 months after the second session, which is actually really good for therapy in this patient population. But when you add MDMA, it more than doubles to 56%, no longer having PTSD. But what the important point is that once people learn how to process trauma, and they learn that they don't have to suppress it, they keep getting better on their own. So at the 12-month follow-up, 2/3 no longer have PTSD, which is rather astonishing. And of the 1/3 that still has PTSD, a lot of them have had clinically significant reductions in PTSD symptoms. How does this work? So PTSD changes your brain. PTSD makes it so that you have a hyperactive amygdala. Your prefrontal cortex, where you think logically, has less activity. This is where we process fear. And then the hippocampus, where we process memories into long-term memory, is reduced as well. So things seem like they're always happening, the trauma. But MDMA does the opposite. You get a reduction in the amygdala, so you don't respond as fearful a way. That was almost like the voice that Nick was hearing that was about criticizing him. You know, that was overwhelmed by sort of the sage part. You have increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, where you're thinking more logically, and this is the crucial part, the hippocampus and the amygdala have greater connectivity, so that you can take these traumatic memories that are sort of stuck in short-term memory and process them into long-term memory. There's been some neuroscientists at Johns Hopkins that have given MDMA to octopuses. I'm proud to say it was our MDMA. It was her octopuses, but it was our MDMA. And it turns out that we deviated 250 million years ago, evolutionary, from octopuses. And so the question was, how deep does this effect of MDMA go? And so under MDMA, well, they figured out how to soak the octopus in an MDMA bath for 10 minutes. That's here. This is the experiment. Some of the time, they put it in 3 chambers. And octopuses, unless it's mating season, they're asocial. So they spend way more time with this inanimate object than with another octopus, regardless of the gender mix. Soak them in MDMA, and then put them in the same thing, and they spend way more time now with the other octopus. So MDMA actually promotes pro-social behavior, and this same neuroscientist has a paper coming out next week in Nature with mice showing that MDMA, through oxytocin signaling, increases or opens up what they call a critical period of learning for social reward learning. And so you can rewire your brain during these critical processes. And so MDMA permits neurogenesis and rewiring of the brain. And so this is our therapeutic approach, which is 3 MDMA sessions 1 month apart. The first will be 80 milligrams. We follow that 2 hours later with half the initial amount. And then this second session is going to be, probably everybody will go up to 120 unless there's some really good reason not to, and then 60 milligrams. And then the therapist and the patients will decide on the third. These are 1 month apart, and there's 12 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions. Right here would be 3 before the first one for preparation, and then 3 after each one for integration, and then 2-month follow-up is what we're looking at for FDA. And then 12-month follow-up is for insurance companies to show it's durable. We're going to do open science and this transparent, accessible, knowledge shared, open source, equity and access, which we've heard a lot about earlier today and yesterday, and do a lot with public education. However, Ronald Reagan passed a bill that provided incentives for developing drugs that are off patent. And so those are called data exclusivity. So we will use those to be selling MDMA for a profit to make more money for more research. Now, we need to really talk all over the place about what we're doing. So I've spoken at Human Rights Foundation, the Oslo Freedom Forum, both at the Kennedy Center in New York and also in Oslo for human rights activists. What was particularly difficult for me was that when I was at the Kennedy School, it was at Tiananmen Square, and we organized an International Day of Fasting for Freedom and Human Rights in China and Tibet. We had people from all over the world doing it, and there was actually a student who had been severed his legs by a tank in Tiananmen Square, was one of the speakers there. So I was very sensitive to, the plight of the Chinese students and the oppressive nature of the Chinese government. But then 2 weeks later, after that, I was in China, and we were speaking with Chinese psychiatrists and psychotherapists. There's one of our donors said that when we had the psychedelic revolution in America, they had the Cultural Revolution, and his parents and all their relatives are traumatized from that. So he's helping us try to bring MDMA to China. We have bipartisan support. George Soros, the Open Society Foundation, donated $70,000 for this treatment, for this training program for therapists of color that we're going to have in August. So we have money from George Soros, but also from Rebecca Mercer as well. And so she's been the main funder for Trump and Bannon. She helped get him elected. They're the ones that owned Cambridge Analytica. But the only limitation she put on her donation was that it be limited to veterans. And then John Lubecki, Olivia's his wife, he's one of the vets that went through our program. And after he got healed, he tried to commit suicide 5 times. He was the veteran liaison for Rand Paul's presidential campaign, and he's got loads of Republican connections, so he's been helping us build bipartisan support. And in October, one of the things I'm most proud of is we spoke at the International Association of Chiefs of Police. That's what that is, International Association of Chiefs of Police. We have a senior retired DEA official who is now helping us because his son went into the Army, has PTSD, and uses cannabis for PTSD. And so we were able to speak to police chiefs. What was weird was that 2 days before our talk, President Trump decided that he would speak to this group. It was like 10,000 police officers and police chiefs from all over the world, and they scheduled his talk at the same time as our talk, which was bad because I thought he needed to come hear our talk. But still, 30 people came to our talk, including this one police psychologist that we're now training as well to learn how to give MDMA to other police officers with trauma. So it's really crucial. I'll skip over this, but we've had very positive coverage in Fox News. This is an incredible 6 minutes. If you just go Greg Gutfeld, MDMA, PTSD, you'll get this. But it's so important that we reach across political divides. And we've been getting a lot of criticism, I would say, for working with Rebecca Mercer and working, seeking out Fox News and all. And so at Passover last year, my wife and I go to a friend of ours who offers Passover for like 60 people. And we got there, and it was frustrating for us. Our friends were sitting somewhere else. There was just this elderly couple that was almost at the edge of one table. And so we sat beside them. We thought, this is going to be boring. And we ended up having this interesting conversation with this couple. The guy, everybody there was scientists. And so I said, are you a scientist? He said, no, I'm a judge. And then his wife started talking about how she's writing a book about parents who've lost their children and how they go through grief. So we started talking about MDMA and psychedelics and had this terrific conversation about marijuana and the federal government monopoly that we have to end. And this conversation was going great. And suddenly some things started dawning on me that this guy I thought might be more than I realized. And I realized that it was Stephen Breyer, the Supreme Court Justice. So I said, I've got an ethical question to ask you. I didn't want to ask him a legal question, but I said, I've got an ethical question. We've taken money from Rebecca Mercer. A lot of people are criticizing us for that. And so what do you think about that? And he said, you did exactly the right thing. In this hyper-partisan area that we're living in right now, we need, the essence of democracy is building alliances with people on single issues that you may agree with them on, even if you disagree with them on all sorts of other issues. And we don't have enough of that bipartisan. Yeah.
According to a news...
There. So we've got all of this, from left to right, great media. The key issue about how we're going to make this into a medicine is once it's approved, we negotiated already with DEA and with the FDA that the only people that will be able to prescribe it are people that we've trained. And they will only be able to prescribe it under direct supervision of the therapists. So it's only going to be clinic settings, never a take-home drug, so it's easy for the government to regulate. Expanded access is going to be starting later this year. We're going to have clinics all over the place that we're starting to train people for that. We can't slow down phase 3, and these need to be treatment-resistant PTSD patients, but it's going to be, they don't have to have severe PTSD, so that's going to be starting. We do have our manualized therapy on the website, and you can see that describes the therapeutic method. I would suggest that for those of you that are interested in being psychedelic therapists, the way I learned, you just sit for your friends, and you have them sit for you. And you can learn about our method, and that's one of the best ways to learn, is to actually practicing. We all have issues to deal with. And you might think, oh, you're not qualified, and I'm sure that that might be true to some extent, but if you really care and you try to create a safe space, that's the best way to do it. So we have all these adherence competencies that are also in that, and our standard model is the male-female team, but all variations are permitted. We're not rigid about it at all. This was our training program. One of the two people has to have a license as a therapist, but the other does not. And so we're now arguing with the FDA about, they wanted the second person to have a BA. We're saying that's not necessary, and that our training should be sufficient for the second person, because it's more expensive to have two therapists. And I think the idea is to have the second person basically working for free to get the hours that they need to get licensed to be a therapist, or working for very little relatively. So that's the approach. I won't go into this now because we're almost out of time, but I will say that we're going to have two different certificates. Taking MDMA as part of your training is optional. We don't think we should require it of anybody. You shouldn't force anybody to take a drug, but patients should know whether their therapists have taken it. So we'll have two different diplomas. This is the diploma if you've gone ahead and taken the drug. So, you know, we do have the Zendo program, which is psychedelic harm reduction at Burning Man and other festivals, and that's a way for all of you to learn about the method. The methods of the psychedelic harm reduction are very, very similar to the methods of the therapy. Create a safe space is number one, then talk through, not talk down, meaning address the issues. Don't try to say, oh, it's a beautiful day, here's a flower, forget about your problems. And then what we say is that we're sitting, not guiding. That we're not telling people what to do. It's coming from them. That's the essence. And then the fourth thing, which is crucial, is difficult is not the same as bad. And when you take drugs for fun, you know, when it gets difficult, you kind of assume that means it's a bad trip, you got to shut it down. But difficult is not the same as bad. So with that, I'll just say that there's a few more minutes for questions. And so it's been just a pleasure to work on this for all my life. I hope that in 2022, 2021 is when we think we're going to get the end of it, get MDMA to become a medicine. And 2022 is when I think I'll become a psychedelic psychotherapist. And that'll be 50 years after I decided that I wanted to do that when I was 18. So I think that I think that Betty at an earlier talk talked about radical incrementalism. And so I guess one key message for you all is that really think long term. And that when you're younger, time is different than when you're older. And so now I've had 3 kids and they've all gone off to college. And so when I look back, I'm like, where did that 20 years go? It's, you know, so a 20-year plan is not a big deal. And you're likely to live for a long time. So really, I think, go step by step. Don't skip steps. That's when you get a backlash. And be patient about it, and also think that as long as you're working on something, you have it then. You know, that's what you're struggling with. It doesn't have to succeed even. It has to be, you know, worthwhile struggle. So pick worthy goals, but then be very patient. And if it takes 50 years, it doesn't seem that long by the time you're looking back on it. Thank you.